Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Sunday School Dropouts. I'm excited this week because we have with us author Sarah Henn Hayward, who wrote the book Giving Up God. She's here to talk about that, her background, and what her process of deconstruction was like, as well as how her faith values that she grew up with still play into who she is today, even though she identifies as an agnostic atheist. So I'm excited for you to hear her story. You'll hear me say this on the interview, but it's very rare that I get to speak with somebody who came out of the same denomination background that I did. And in part, that's because we grew up in a similar area of the country, and that's where those churches were. And I had to laugh because she described him as the frozen chosen, which, if you remember several episodes ago with Jessica Hine, who's from the Church of Christ, which I feel like is the Southern version of the Evangelical Free Church, also described herself in the denomination as the frozen chosen. So I think I was onto something when I was like, hey, Church of Christ and Evangelical Free Church are just the Northern and Southern versions of one another. All that to say, you'll hear a lot more about that, and I'm really excited for the episode. Just a little bit about Sarah before we jump into it. Sarah is somebody who thought that being a Christian was her absolute foundation and all of her identity. But she gradually came to believe that her concept of God no longer made sense, which was actually pretty terrifying. In changing her mind, she lost a big part of her identity and connection with others, but she also discovered a deeper sense of self, a deeper sense of peace and honesty than she ever had before, and she says she would make that same choice over and over again. Leaving God behind had opened her mind, her heart, her sense of wonder, and she feels more deeply connected to everyone and everything than she ever had before, and feels that now her life is truly beautiful. So with that, let's welcome in Sarah Henn Hayward to the Sunday School Dropouts. Hello, Sarah. Welcome to the Sunday School Dropouts podcast. It is so good to have you here.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yes. Now, I am particularly excited because you are the first person that we're having on the podcast that shares a church history that I have. And so I'm excited to do some comparing of notes. But I'm curious if you'll just start off telling us a little bit about your background inside the Evangelical Free Church, and then we'll get into your book, and I've got some questions and stuff to talk about there. But I'd love to hear more about your background.
Yeah, sure. So I consider myself basically born into the EV Free Church. My parents were both a little bit later in life converts. So my dad grew up Catholic. My mom grew up Methodist, I believe, and neither one of them were really that into it as children and growing up, and kind of came to faith later in life in college. Actually, my mom was converted by a friend from Campus Crusade for Christ, which I ended up later joining, so lots of full circle moments. So when they got married, they wanted to pick a church to go to together. That was important for them to be united on this sort of new religious front that they had started. And I think they just threw a dart at the map and picked the EV Free Church. I'm not sure.
Gosh. That's so sad for many reasons.
Yeah. My dad was like, went to Catholic school, got hit by the nuns. So he was not interested in pursuing a Catholic faith, I don't think. And my mom also didn't really want to follow in any of her tradition from her youth. So they picked an EV Free Church. And I have mixed feelings about it. Honestly, it was such a huge part of my life. In my childhood, I did Sunday school there. I did Awana there. I did youth group. And especially the youth group as I got older into junior high and high school was tons of fun. You know, it was all the chubby bunny games and retreats and all the weird and somewhat dangerous games you would play in settings.
Yeah, that are now super illegal.
Right, kids have choked to death. But it was fun for us at the time. So I have a lot of fond memories growing up in that church because I'm still even friends with a few people that I knew from there. But looking back, I can see how they were very closed-minded, our way or the highway. We've got everything figured out, and more exclusive than I realized too. I grew up in a very white suburb of Chicago, and being outwardly gay was not allowed back in the 80s and 90s yet. And so a very insular, protected kind of community, which looking back now is regrettable to have missed out on more diversity growing up, but definitely that was how I was raised. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one thing that churches, quote unquote, get right is that community aspect. And I feel like a lot of people that grew up in the Evangelical Free Church and many other, what I would consider high control religions, had this ability to kind of like infiltrate all areas of your life because they're like, oh, you need friends? We have a group for that. You need, a soup kitchen? We have that. We need community support? We've got that. And I feel like that was kind of the evangelical part of, that denomination was just, we've got something for everybody. So join our group and don't be a part of the world.
Right. Exactly. In the world, but not of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you had to describe the Evangelical Free Church to somebody who had never heard about it before, how would you describe it? Because I have my way that I tell people, but I'm curious to know yours.
It's again funny looking backwards because since writing my book and talking with more people, I've realized that my church was actually somewhat liberal or progressive compared to some of the real hardcore fundamental churches. At the time, I would have, or not knowing that, I would have described it as very conservative, very like frozen chosen. We did not, it was not charismatic. There was, if you, maybe we clapped, but if you raised your hands, you were kind of a weirdo in the sanctuary. And just a lot of subtle control and shame. Like I said, you definitely couldn't be gay. You definitely weren't supposed to drink. You definitely were not supposed to have sex. And that was pretty tightly enforced. But like through osmosis, I don't remember a ton of blatant sermons on all those topics, but it was definitely understood that you have to behave well to stay within our good graces.
Yeah, a lot of behavioral stuff for sure. I tell people when they're like, what is the Evangelical Free Church? I say it is the hellfire and brimstone of the Southern Baptist Church, the rigidity of Church of Christ, which is also that frozen chosen, because that's how they describe themselves as well. The stoicism of Lutheranism, like no emotion. At least we couldn't like that. And I lived in northern Minnesota, which was also very like Scandinavian culture.
Stuff.
Yeah. And then all wrapped up in Reformed theology. So that was fun,
Yes.
It really puts the fun in fundamentalism. Yeah.
Yes. Right.
Yeah. But I think that it's interesting, to talk to somebody from that because, obviously your background plays so much inspiration for your book and your whole process and what got you here. So, what, if you look back at your background, what of that kind of inspired you to write your book that you have today?
Well, I think I grew up, again, that idea that there was one answer, the right way or one way to live and behave. And so as I started to question and challenge that was so freeing to me. It was scary. It was kind of terrifying at first. And bit by bit, I sort of chipped away kind of issue by issue at first questioning the exclusivity of church, the idea of a permanent hell, later became open and affirming in my beliefs. So kind of slowly dipped more toes into the water and realized like I'm allowed to think for myself and look outside of what I've been taught. And so part of me wanted to write the book to demonstrate how that could be done, to comfort people who have done that and still feel like it's wrong or still scared that they're going to end up in hell or punished or, I think there's so much fear. And just to show that you can do it and it all can work out. I'm still a very happy person and like life is great. And so it's a big deal to radically change your beliefs, but it does not have to be the end of the world. It's a new world, really.
Yeah, I appreciate that. There's so many people, and I think maybe this is due to fundamentalism being so black and white and binary. And there's so many people that are like I didn't kind of slowly come out of it. It was like there was a day and I was absolutely done. And I used to think that that's what my story was until several years ago. I was like, hold on a second. No, it's a little bit like what you're describing of kind of like slowly asking these questions little bit by little bit, and it's undoing until one day it was like, oh, yeah, I'm at a very different place than where I started and a totally different person. So I really appreciated in your book just talking through that process because I think there are a lot of people who navigate it in that way, who are trying to make it work until they can't
Right.
anymore.
Yeah. Doing the mental
Yeah.
gymnastics of trying to still be a Christian, but just with a new label. I
Yeah.
called myself a progressive Christian for a long time
Mm-hmm.
and trying to
Mm-hmm.
just make it work because the thought of it didn't even
Yeah.
occur to me that I could leave or to even really question the absolute certainty of
Mm-hmm.
God. Did not
Yeah.
even really cross my radar until I was pretty far into my deconstruction. And then as
Mm-hmm.
soon as I did get to those really deep questions, that's when it all kind of blew up and like the big moment. But yeah, a
Gotcha.
lot of groundwork
Yeah.
was laid first.
Yes. Yeah. So I feel like, okay, so in your story, you don't talk about any sort of like psychological or traumatic kind of impacts of religion. So how did you get out unscathed? No,
I know.
kidding.
I'm lucky, I think, in
Yeah.
a lot of ways. I was thinking about this the other day because I thought I had it pretty good. I didn't have any, big major traumas, but it was around. Like,
Yeah.
there was still
Yeah.
some scandals, even at my church. They didn't end up affecting me personally, but we had a pastor on staff that had a record of being a peeping Tom. And the pastor who hired
Yeah.
him did not feel the need to let the board know that when they hired him.
Yeah.
We had a youth pastor get fired for inappropriate closeness, intimacy with one of the girls. Unclear if anything physical ever happened, but definitely some emotional, boundaries were crossed.
Yeah.
And it wasn't me, but it was a girl I knew, so realizing
Yeah.
like, yeah, I wasn't maybe specifically traumatized, but it was still around.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But I
Absolutely.
think I avoided more trauma, one by virtue of my identity. I actually do now identify as bisexual as I've explored my identity more, which I wasn't allowed to even think of before. But
Of course. Yeah.
because I'm attracted to men, it was easy to just say I was straight. And so
Right.
I didn't have to wrestle with any of that and being closeted or feel like I was lying to myself or my community. And I was a good girl. I followed the rules and I did all the things I was supposed to. I didn't drink until the very end of high school when I decided I did need to know how to handle myself
Yes.
for college. I did not sleep around. Like I was a rule follower. I'm a firstborn. And so I did everything I was supposed to do. So
Yeah,
I
I
never
get
got
that.
pushback or punished or anything like that. So I think that's part of how I escaped getting any public,
Yeah.
talking tos or because I know people that were called up in front of their whole church for
Yeah.
wearing too short of a skirt or,
Right.
being too flirty. And thankfully nothing that traumatic happened to me.
Yeah. And if I'm remembering right too, like the evangelical church doesn't have like that overarching, like the Southern Baptist Church has like the convention that you give
Yeah.
money to, and like they kind of govern what the churches do and what the beliefs are. And there's like the Evangelical Free Church headquarters, but they don't necessarily dictate what each church is supposed to teach and how progressive or liberal they are. And so I've often wondered if that's why a lot of that got away with in churches. Like,
Yeah, there wasn't so much top-down control. It's almost run more like a franchise.
yeah, it
It's
really
just
is.
each
Yeah.
individual local. It has that name, that umbrella, and I
Yep,
think you
yeah.
get some funding from the big group. But really, it was kind of to each his own. And our head pastor was the one really in charge and deciding how things went. And so,
Yeah.
my church maybe was a little more open-minded than some. Definitely, we had like all white male staff except
Oh,
for
yeah.
the children's
Yeah.
ministry person could be a
Right.
woman.
Token woman. Yep. Yep.
Yes, but in
or
our
the
youth
assistants.
group,
Yeah.
they did let girls speak in front of the whole youth group. So at
Okay.
least to the fellow children, a girl could actually go in front, which I did once. A couple of my friends
Yeah.
did, and so I didn't feel that sense of being smothered either for being a woman with thoughts. That was somewhat at least encouraged or not at least stamped out completely. So
Yeah. I'm
certainly
so glad.
escaped
Yeah.
some bad stuff there too. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think we're around the same age. So you talk about purity culture in your book, but what would you say was your experience of purity culture?
Yeah, so that I think is one of the biggest ways that I was negatively affected by my growing up. I really do think it kind of broke me in a way because it was just don't do it. Basically don't be a sexual being. Ignore
Right.
that part of yourself that doesn't exist until you get married. So it's not even there. So that's why I was so out of touch with even my desires or the type of person I was attracted to. I had girl crushes and things like that I would just call, I just really want to be your friend kind of stuff. because I was just so completely not connected with that part of myself. And so with boys too, I was paranoid about leading anyone on. I was very resistant. It was my mom, who did not grow up the same way, who encouraged me to start wearing makeup. Like, I didn't even want to wear makeup because that would be attracting boys' attention. If I had a shirt that was a little bit sheer and you could tell I had a bra on, I would panic. And my mom's like, they know you have a bra. What's the big deal? Like, of course they're wearing one. Why is it a big deal? I'm like, but it'll make them think. It'll make them know I have breasts and want to do something with them. So I had a lot of fear over causing a man to want me or stumble or lust or anything like that. Which, looking back, I'm like, gosh, did they have no responsibility? It was all on me to be the gatekeeper. Not fair, but
yeah. I've been so surprised at how many people share a similar story where we didn't, like, our parents weren't necessarily the ones enforcing the rules of purity culture. In fact, sometimes they were pushing back against them, but they also weren't necessarily checking in with like what the youth leaders are talking about and things like that. So we're in this position of having all of these rules for ourselves that are more strict than what our parents are enforcing. The amount of anxiety that causes, and even like I remembered feeling a bit of a disconnect from my parents, like being told you should wait until you're married to kiss, and they're like, what? Like, you should wait till you're married to have sex, but like this whole kissing thing, like that's kind of prudish. And I was like, but that's what God wants, and like that's what I'm being told to now, and it's just, but so many parents had no idea what was actually being taught.
That tracks, right, with the 80s, 90s parents. Like, they didn't know anything that was... We were out for hours and just gone all day, and they had no idea. So much less hands-on parenting than today's parents are.
Yes. Yeah. And I'm sure they thought, this is a church. And so, if our kids are going to be, somewhere, like, why not there? And we can trust what's being taught and promoted. So...
just kind of that blind trust, which I think is how a lot of the sex scandal stuff ended up happening, because there wasn't a lot of oversight or people paying attention, and all kinds of things were going on.
Absolutely. You don't have to give away all of this, because I really want people to go and read your book, but I appreciated you talking through some of the discrepancies that you recognized inside of evangelical Christianity that caused you to start asking questions and keep taking steps away. And I just wondered if you can highlight like some of those things that you did start to notice. I know you kind of briefly said it before, but kind of go into it a little bit more.
Sure.
Just that led you down the slippery slope.
I know. I kind of hate that I proved a slippery slope argument true. I'm like, it's a logical fallacy, but it is what it looks like now, looking backward.
It's all good. Yeah.
I would say probably the first really big sort of, I think of them almost like as my personal schisms of faith. And the first big one was on exclusivity, that Christians had the sole right to eternal paradise or heaven or anything. And that happened because I was lucky enough to study abroad during college, and I got to go to Australia, which was amazing and super fun. And I met a lot of other study abroad students, and even a lot of the Australian Australian in general is pretty atheistic, despite Hillsong and that starting there. A lot of Australians have no faith, no religious belief. But there's a lot of Asian influence in Australia, and a lot of those folks are Muslim. And so I met a lot of Muslim friends and people who we got to talking, because, as a Christian, so I'm supposed to steer the conversation that way as much as I can.
Yes, always.
And talking to them, I thought, my gosh, they sound just like me. Their belief, their faith, their fervency, their commitment to those values and their scriptures. It really struck me that talking to me or her, this Muslim friend of mine, you wouldn't know which one of us was a Christian or a Muslim unless you clarified. She sounded just like me, and the values were so similar too. Wanted to care for the poor and, be kind and generous and all that kind of stuff. So that threw me for a loop, because I thought, she's so devout and so committed to this. If she's wrong, could I be the one that's wrong? Like, am I screwed and I'm barking up the wrong tree? And so the fear of that, instead, it's just the mental gymnastics. I just decided, well, I can't be wrong. she doesn't sound wrong, so maybe it's all right. And it's kind of that many roads lead to Rome
Yeah.
sort of view
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
God is bigger than one religion, and of course God is all encompassing. So maybe God's using Islam as a way to still filter people to heaven and
Mm-hmm.
all the hundreds of religions that have existed
Yeah.
over time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was a big change that happened just from meeting people and being around different thoughts and points of view.
Yeah.
And I think I took that fairly well in stride. That felt like a nice workaround. I felt comforted by that. I had kind of an early example. I was a big Madeline L'Engle fan, the Wrinkle in
Mm.
Time series.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And she wrote a lot of other more adult sort of spiritual memoirs that I had read.
Okay.
And she was an
Yeah.
Episcopal, so she had a little bit more of an open, kind of mystical faith even. And she had mentioned in some of her books that she did not think of hell as a permanent place at all, that eventually
interesting.
every single person ever born would end up with God. Even Satan, she would say, would be redeemed one day, that it all would be redeemed, that not one,
Yeah.
child would be lost, kind of a thing. So I had that in the back of my mind from reading her as a teenager. And I thought, okay, yeah, that sounds good. I like the idea of
Sure.
that.
Mm-hmm.
So my faith got a lot more open-minded, but still I claimed Christianity as my branch of that faith for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had another big schism later in college when I met my first outwardly gay friend and realized that he also had faith and was a Christian. And
Yeah.
that threw me for a loop to think, well, how can he be a Christian if he's living in sin all the time? And that made me analyze the very few, chapters of the Bible that
Right.
even talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, right, it was when I was about a junior in college, there was a documentary that came out that I don't remember now how I stumbled across it, but it was called For the Bible Tells Me So. And I don't know if
Yeah.
you've seen it.
Yeah, yeah,
Have
I
you?
saw it a
Yeah.
while ago. It's really good. It's really eye-opening, sad. Like, yeah, it's very intense.
Yeah, but it's made for Christians. And so it's the whole movie is trying to justify homosexuality as a, acceptable way to live kind of a thing. It's I think the target audience was Christian parents who had a gay child. So the movie was meant to be very like, it's okay. They're allowed to be gay. They're born this way. It's not a choice, whatever. And so that movie just totally 180'd my opinion. And I was 100% on board after that. And again, because I kind of changed my mind in that context of a Christian argument, they were using verses and using context of kind of the more behind the scenes of the Sodom and Gomorrah story and all that. It felt a little scary, but safe enough to make that choice. It wasn't some atheist telling me to knock it off and stop believing that. It was Christians in a different capacity. So that was a huge pivot point.
Yeah.
And around that same time as well, I was becoming just more politically aware and engaged and active and found myself way more drawn to progressive politics than the conservative way I was raised. And so I think it all sort of blended and meshed together, and I became this, progressive kind of socialist type of Christian who just wanted everyone to get along and treat everybody well and be kind.
Yeah.
But those were
Yeah.
some big shifts.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And we'll get to kind of the title you hold for yourself nowadays later on. But I do find it just very, that progressive nature. It feels so much easier, like to kind of like slowly walk into it. And I don't mean like, oh, it was easy, but like how nice it is to just kind of like be peeling back the layers one after the other rather than kind of like, I had this thing one day and now it's gone the next day, which can be so disruptive to people's lives and identity and nervous systems. And that like that kind of slow, methodical step after step feels like really like a relief almost.
Right. Well, it felt more true. It felt kinder. It felt in line with this God of love that I was taught about. Like, how would love let majority of the world be punished for being born in the wrong place? How would love let people born with certain orientations just be automatically doomed? Like, that didn't feel right. And so changing my mind in those ways, it felt more in line with the God that I, thought I believed in.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Now, one of the things you talk about in the book is your relationship with your partner and how you guys are in very different places spiritually. And that's
Mm-hmm.
something, when I work with clients, I don't work with couples as much anymore, but I do consult on cases and stuff like that. And I think that this deconstruction, deconversion, religious trauma, like that can really cause a rupture in relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And people are like, okay, we got to figure out why we're even together. If
Mm-hmm.
this no longer stands anymore, if the reasons we got married or the foundation we thought we had, if that's not there anymore, we've got to figure
Mm-hmm.
it out. And it's something that can be so difficult. And so I just wondered if you could speak to that a little bit more of like how you navigate these differences of belief, especially since you have children as well.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because
Yeah.
my ultimate exit from the faith didn't come until after both of our kids were
Mm.
born, when the entire concept of a God no longer worked for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it all happened kind of when the shit hit the fan, was pandemic times. And so it
Mm.
was this weird twilight zone. Nothing was open. We weren't leaving our house. Like, everyone was sort of living in this kind of a fog. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think my husband was just in denial for a while of it all, and thought I had been laid off. So I was, for the
Yeah.
second time, kind of back to back, which I'm
Mm-hmm.
a physical therapist. I thought my job was pretty secure for life, and found
Yeah.
myself unemployed in the pandemic. And so that was upsetting, obviously. And I think he just thought, she's just mad at the world right now and bitter, and she'll come back
Right.
around. And it's not really, she's
Mm-hmm.
not, doesn't mean what she's saying. But
Yeah.
I did. And so,
Yeah.
and
Joke's on
I'm,
you. Yeah.
yeah. And I'm one who, I think I've done a lot of reading and learning more about like racial identity and things. And I think as white women, one of our hugest traits was that we were told not to rock the boat and to be
Mm.
nice and to go along with the flow. And so
Yeah.
I felt like I changed my mind in this huge way. I didn't feel any pressure to make him come with me. I
Sure.
wasn't bringing it up a lot. I wasn't like super in his face about it. And it really was me writing the book that actually was the hardest thing, because now it was this big outward representation of
Yeah.
like, oh, you're doubling down on this, and
Mm-hmm.
really coming out, out loud with
Yeah.
your lack of belief. And so the book became a real pain point for us. Unfortunately, I've been able to share with him how I've had a lot of people reach out to me from around the world, even, which has been so bananas, but who've been comforted and really felt some sense of peace and camaraderie, which is why I wrote the book. And so highlighting that for him and saying, I didn't write this just to like stick it to you or to the other Christians.
Yeah.
It wasn't from a place of bitterness. It was from a place of wanting to connect and to reach out to others in the same boat.
Yeah.
But it's hard, and it's, it's going through, I think, evolutions of change within our relationship. It was real rough in the beginning. I've kept going to church with him, not wanting to rock the boat. And so, in my exit, because it wasn't super traumatic, I didn't have a lot of anger. So it wasn't like super triggering to go to church. It was more just,
Sure.
now I'm listening with a much more critical eye, and maybe inwardly rolling my eyes at some of the stuff I'm hearing more. But there was a Sunday, the church we go to now is just a non-denominational kind of whatever. And they don't do communion every week. And so the first week it came up that they were doing it, and I said, I can't go up there. Like, I
Sure.
don't buy it.
Yeah.
That for him was kind of the big dagger in the heart moment. And unfortunately, it was really affected him physically. He started getting all these, I think the
Wow.
stress and mental health showed up in his body of all of that. And so it's been a long road, and I've tried to not to, it's hard to not feel guilty, because it's completely because of my decision. But at the same time, I know it's not fair to tell somebody to never change, and people grow and change in a lot of unexpected ways. And he recognizes that. He wouldn't want me to just lie to him and say, I believe when I don't. Like, we both value honesty, and we've always been very open communicators. So I'm like, the unfortunate truth is just, I've made a decision you don't love, and we just have to learn how to live in that. So we're
Yeah.
learning, I think, giving each other a lot of grace, talking about it, but not all the time. And just kind of day by day going through it and touching base as we can. But yeah, it's been hard. And with our kids, it's only
Yeah.
getting more and more to the forefront as they get older and start asking more questions. And so we're kind of, I don't want to say making it up as we go, but I mean, that's what most of us parents are doing anyway.
Yeah,
So,
I think, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
I mean, I was on a podcast the other day and we were talking a little bit about this, like, because kids are going to ask questions. And I think many of us were taught, you don't ask questions. You just accept the truth for what your parents say, what the pastor says, whatever. You don't ask questions. And what a gift it is just to even let your children ask those questions and not have to have the answer or tell them, you know what, I don't know, but
Yeah.
let's figure it out together. And I feel
Right.
like that's such a gift that you give them.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
just tell them a lot how there's all kinds of different beliefs out there, and a lot of people are going to believe a lot of different things. And so, thankfully, my husband is a very progressive, liberal
Sure.
Christian, and so he's not, a biblical literalist or
Yeah.
anything like that. So we're able to just, say, you know what, mom and dad don't always have the same opinion on this stuff. Dad thinks that maybe God is like this. Mom thinks maybe it's more just kind of, we're all here because we're here and we're supposed to treat each other well because that's a good way to be. So we have started saying a little bit more that we have different thoughts as mom and dad, and kids are able to handle that. I think there's a lot of fear that kids need that rigid guideline, but they're fine. They're, they can take that in and figure it out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or not
Especially
be
because,
shattered by it or
Yeah.
confused.
and when they know that like it's okay to keep asking questions, like that's not going to be shamed or, met with
Right.
resistance. I feel like that's what makes it okay to sit in kind of some of those gray spaces of like, oh, my parents believe differently, but that doesn't mean that they don't love each other or they don't love us, or,
Right.
like they're able to
Yeah.
also feel that sense of connection, which is really incredible.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's reflective of the world today. Like half their friends at school don't go to church. They have friends
Sure.
whose parents are divorced or who's, they have friends from different backgrounds. And so I think it's a nice little, within our little white family, a little bit of
Yeah.
diversity to show like, there's diversity in thought and culture and all kinds of stuff. And that's great. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And we're all just doing our best to try to figure this out and live a good life. And we all have a little different flavor of doing that. So that's okay.
I like the way you frame that. Like it's a little tiny diversity within the family, but how it can really have those long-term, like really positive impacts.
Yeah, hopefully.
Hopefully. Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure. You brought up something interesting because you said, kind of the final nail in the coffin was during the pandemic. And I feel like for a lot of people, that was definitely a time where questions became so much more like up to the surface. We can ask them. We're not in this building every week. The influence is very
Right.
different. Yeah, I'm just curious to know your thoughts on why you think that was so pivotal for so many people, really starting to question their beliefs in a new way.
Yeah, well, I think a few things. It was such a pause on life, on the normal day-to-day schedule and routine. And so most of us found ourselves with a lot more time on our hands. And for people who weren't interested in making sourdough bread or doing some of the other pandemic activities, maybe, they were sitting around thinking and asking questions. And for me personally, I had been laid off, so I had tons of free time all of a sudden.
Right.
And I really connect and love nature and being outside. So I was lucky enough that my kids were still napping at that time and my husband was working from home. So while they were asleep, I would go on like big long walks around this park near our house. And that's when I was really kind of mulling everything over and thinking through, do I even think God is a real thing? Gosh, that felt scary to even ask. But I think too, the other part of the pandemic was that so many things that we had come to rely on and think were solid were revealed to not be solid. Like even just in modern days, I've never seen an empty grocery store before, but to see empty shelves at the grocery store was creepy and weird. And to think we are a lot more vulnerable than we thought we were, stuff could happen. And some of the stuff I've come to just rely on isn't obviously completely reliable or,
Right.
we relied on being able to just be healthy and all this stuff. And it all got kind of thrown under the microscope and revealed to be not as predictable as we thought. So I think when one sort of assumed reality is challenged, that opens the door to then maybe challenge some other realities and ways that you just assumed life worked, and to think maybe it doesn't work that way. So I think that was another avenue that kind of got into people's minds.
Yeah. I've often wondered too, like, when we have like these weekly services, it's like a weekly dose or a weekly hit of kind of this message or this theology or a reminder, like this is who I am or what I'm about or whatever. And so it's like, even if you start to doubt on a Thursday, like Sunday always is coming, like that sort of
Right.
thing.
Yes,
And I wonder like how much church participation is emphasized because it keeps people in that system and it keeps you from questioning. And then the pandemic was like, we're kind of taking that away. And now there's not just a few days in between your questions and the next hit. It's, sometimes months.
Yeah, that, and then coupled with the fact that so many churches kind of behaved very unchurch-like, unchrist-like, not being kind and considerate of vulnerable, disabled, or, immunocompromised people, seeing so many churches be flagrantly disobeying the rules, even if those rules turned out to be, the stuff on the masks and being closed as long as we were.
Sure.
There's debate, but you were doing the best we could with the information we had at the time. And I think seeing so many churches just kind of throw the big middle finger up to public concern and public health, that certainly would have made me question more if I hadn't already been. And
exactly.
What are you doing here? That doesn't seem very Christ-like. So that probably was another big crack that got some people thinking, I would imagine.
Yeah. And it feels like that was coming more from a place of like desperation and we need to keep our doors open more than like we need to shepherd our flock. At least that's how it felt to me. Like we can't lose and I get it. Like that's a lot of income. It's a lot of expenses, and when you do, I totally understand that piece of it. But it just kind of felt like, if we don't have services, like we are going to lose the influence and the finances that we have, to stay open. And maybe that's a whole other conversation.
The business of church. Sure.
Yeah, exactly. Well, one of the things that I mean, I'm going to let you say kind of your title that you give yourself, but if you're not a Christian, like what do you call yourself, and why does it matter what you call yourself when it comes to faith or spirituality or religious? And kind of, I'd love for you to share a little bit about what you call yourself and kind of explain it more.
Sure. Yeah. So the reason I wanted a label was my therapist at the time kind of encouraged me to create a new label, because she said, people are going to ask. If you tell someone you're not a Christian after 35 years of being a Christian, they're going to ask, well, what are you now? Or what do you believe now? So having at least a prepared answer to kind of be able to handle that, she thought was a good idea, which made sense. And in the book, I wrestle with a couple different concepts of it, because I think I'm more label resistant now, and want to just kind of keep things open. But I was sort of drawn, this is not the one I really use in day-to-day life, but I was drawn to the idea of a Christian atheist. I had come across that term just for the fact that, again, I wasn't super scarred or burned by my faith, and it had formed such a core part of my identity and who I was. And I still have a lot of the same values that I got from the church. Most of what I care about in the world came from at least my later, more progressive church years. And so I felt like saying I was a Christian atheist kind of acknowledged the impact that my faith had on me, even if I no longer bought it and bought in. And so I compared it to being like a secular Jewish person. I culturally, I still know all those songs and have verses that pop in my head once in a while, and know all the lingo and know the Bible stories. And that's always going to be in me, even if I don't believe in God anymore. And so that was a term I threw out there. And I kind of liked that it's confusing and upsetting to people, just to be like, makes you think, huh? Maybe you should think, like thinking is good. So I liked being a pill like that, but
I like that.
But the one I use that I actually go by, if someone does ask, I'll say I'm an agnostic atheist. So I'm atheistic. I don't believe that there is a divine being who did all this on purpose and who's out there watching. But I'm agnostic about it. I'm open-minded because I don't pretend to be the first one to have figured out the mysteries of the universe. The biggest sort of stick in my side of not going full naturalist, humanist, of thinking that there maybe is something, a spiritual realm or something that comes after we die, is the near-death experiences that I read about and how universal those are across faiths, no faith, gang members, mafia members, like everyone has this very similar experience. And some of the stories you could certainly, I love science. I'm a scientific person. I read a lot about that. And so I know there's a compulsion to want to say, well, it's just the brain short-circuiting and freaking out at the end. There was one I read, the woman was underwater for like 45 minutes. I mean, there's people that are on the operating table and there's no brain waves, no brain activity. And somehow they have sensory memories. They can say what somebody came into the room and was wearing, or they smelled somebody was making popcorn down the hall. Things that shouldn't have been working in their body. They have some knowledge of that can't be explained. So to me, I leave the door open. So, okay. The comfort is that across religions, no religion, no faith, everyone had the same lovely, white light, peaceful, kind of lovely experience. And so hopefully it doesn't matter, but we think that we're all going to get that experience in the end. So in a way, it's comforting. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. I like the term agnostic because of the I don't know-ness, and it feels so contrary to what we were taught growing up, where you're supposed to be certain. Sometimes you don't even know what you're supposed to be certain about, but you're supposed to be certain about certainty.
Yes.
And there's something that feels really open about agnostic, like I don't know. It could change tomorrow. And if it does, like, that's okay. I'm going to roll with that. And I don't know, that feels very anti-fundamentalist to me. I personally just love that.
Well, I think it puts the focus back on well, now what? Like, what are you going to do with your life? I don't know what happens after I die, and I won't until I get there, until I die. But so in a sense, set that aside. And what I do have is this here and now in my life. And what are you going to do with that? So I like that it kind of puts the emphasis back on just how you're going to be as a person.
Yeah. One of the things I've always thought of myself is like, I appreciate kindness. I want to be kind to other people. And I think about how that looked when I was in fundamentalism. And there was always, like you said, there's always like a higher reason for it. So I'm going to be nice to you so that maybe we can have a conversation and you'll come to church with me, or I can talk about Jesus or whatever. And there was always this ulterior motive. And now it's like, oh, I'm kind just because I'm kind, because you're a human and you deserve kindness, and I want to be kind to you. And it feels like and it's easier too. Like,
yes. Right. It takes some pressure off. Yeah.
Yeah. But I'm curious to know, like, when you said, there's so many of these values that shaped you that you still bring with you into, this present day. What are some of the things that do still shape you from that upbringing, but that you've been able to bring into being an agnostic atheist?
Yeah, I think really valuing generosity. My parents were very generous people, and they would have said that was from their faith, wanting to, if you've been blessed, to, give back and turn around and grab someone else's hand and help. So I try to be a very generous person. Which being generous means you have to be looking around to see, kind of who may need that step up or that hand. So it's being aware, being, kind of socially engaged, and then trying to help. I think there's some science behind why that feels good to us, and it's part of how our species has survived all these years. And so to me, that's a very human trait, and it's been a winner, a successful trait that's helped us stay around. So I really value that. And being, I like the idea of being humble. I think that's a term that is probably not valued as much these days. And by humble, I mean really that agnostic sense of just, I don't really know, and I'm not going to pretend like I have all the answers, or accepting my powerlessness to really control much. I couldn't stop the pandemic. I couldn't stop myself from getting laid off. There's so much that's out of my control. And to me, there's a freedom in accepting that and realizing that it isn't on at some point things are going to happen to me and I can control my reaction to them. But I'm not in control of every piece of my universe. I think a lot of us try to force a lot of life's hands and try to really manhandle a certain outcome. And really, if you can acknowledge that it's out of your hands, I think that's kind of freeing. So yeah, humility and generosity, and then just kind of the big one, love, love others, which I really think of as kindness. Just treating people with decency and respect. And I would have called my religion on Facebook back in the day for a long time was just Jesus, is what I had written in that little box.
I think I did too. Yeah.
Yeah. Kind of the red letters, and he summed it all up as love God and love your neighbor. So that's what I tried to live. And I still, care about that sort of thing. So
that's
I really don't know that too many of my values have shifted far outside of that. But now just the reason I'm doing them is for a different reason.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's really wonderful. And you talk a lot about, at least I would consider it, spirituality, of like what that looks like in your life. You've got a connection to nature and just the importance of that. What does that look like for you?
Yeah, well, I think, again, there's been a lot of research done that being a spiritually engaged person is healthy for us. You get a lot of benefits of being part of a group of belief. And so I'm pretty sensitive to anything woo-woo. I don't want to be a sucker again and like fall for something else that's false. And so when I say spirituality, I really, if push came to shove, I would say I don't think there is a spiritual realm. I don't think there are ghosts and spirits and demons and angels. I don't. Maybe again, but so my spirituality is really just more that sense of transcendence, that sense that I am one little human on a long, long, long chain of evolution. And it's that knowledge of that connection to our past. And really, for me, evolution has become a beautiful thing to learn about, and how connected we are to everything around us, that we have all evolved off the same original little spark of life on this planet, and how bonkers that is. And so my sense of spirituality is from that sense of connection, that I'm part of this, a tiny part of this much bigger whole that is really just life and consciousness and existence. Not necessarily that there's an afterlife or, spiritual realm of that, but just how beautiful that we're all here and connected, and we can have these thoughts and these deep questions, and being a part of the picture. Again, in a kind of a humble way, that it's not all about me. I'm just one little itty bitty dot in this big tree of life. To me, that's kind of beautiful. So that's where I get my sense of spirituality, is that feeling of connection and being a small part of a very bigger thing going on.
I love that. I love that. What would you say has been kind of the most important for you? I would sometimes I say on your healing journey, but I know maybe that term doesn't fit, but just like as you've learned and grown and gotten to this space where you're at right now, what's been the most important, or a couple of the most important things for you?
I think being fortunate enough to still have a community. A lot of people who deconstruct, I know, end up getting shunned or, excommunicated, kind of a thing. And I just consider lucky that hasn't happened to me. I think partly that's because most of my religious circle, by the time I left, were very progressive. And so they are okay with the idea of differing beliefs. They don't need to feel that sense of control, or that I have to fall lockstep in line.
Right.
So I still have most of my same friends who get it. And I've made new friends since then who are not religious at all, which has been really nice to be able to just talk openly with someone who doesn't think that, there's a God in charge of it all, and be able to have those conversations has been very comforting and reassuring, and kind of establishing that new sense of community. So the good fortune of not losing my old community and have them still, we just don't maybe talk about spiritual-ish stuff as much, period. But our friendships thankfully run deeper than that. And to have that connection with some new folks has been really nice.
Oh, I love
that. I'm a big reader too. So finding similar, like that connection through new authors and new books, and seeing that, I'm not the only one like this. There's lots of us.
No, not at all. Yes. So many of us that are part of this. Well, I want people to go buy your book. So tell me a little bit, or tell the audience a little bit about your book. and then where they can find it.
Okay. Yeah. So it's called Giving Up God. And the subtitle is Resurrecting a Spirituality of Love and Wonder. And so my twist on, there was already a lot of deconstruction books coming out, and I had not read a lot of books at the time that weren't based in something really traumatic happening. And that's the reason somebody left, but kind of a more just intellectual way out. And also one that didn't turn around and then shit all over the church. Like, I have no desire to do that. There's plenty to be mad about in religion, but there's also still some good, and I have to acknowledge that, and that it still helps some people live their best life. And so I wanted to have a book that was a little more nuanced in that way, that was hopeful and positive, but also complete exit. You know, a lot of the sort of Jen Hatmakers and Sarah Bessey books, those are very progressive and more open-minded, but they still believe in some version of God. And so I hadn't seen a lot of books that someone who had been fully 100% in it, a real believer, and had completely walked away. So that's kind of why I wanted to write that story. And yeah, you can buy it anywhere. It's published through Lake Drive Books, so it's up on Amazon. You can get it at Barnes & Noble. You can request it at your local bookstores. It's available in all the places. There's a audio version too. I know a lot of people like to listen to their books now, and so there's all the options.
I love it. Well, it's a really good book. And I feel like, you know, just from your description there, I feel like you captured that. Like, and obviously, like I said, you know, like I identified with it because we grew up in such similar, you know, times and places and denomination and all those things. And I don't get to hear many of those stories. But to your point, there was a lightness to it. Not that it wasn't deep, but there was a lightness of hope, I think, throughout the entire thing, where it wasn't about, you know, just like, let me tell you all the things that were wrong. It was really like, hey, like I started questioning, and like, these are some conclusions I came to, and they're actually like really beautiful and loving. So let's go with that. You know, I really appreciated that.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
Yes. And where can people find you if they want to follow along with your work or connect with you?
The best way would be on my website, which is my whole name, sarahhennhayward.com. I try to keep up with a monthly-ish blog in there and keep sharing my thoughts on all the deep stuff in life. It's become a lot more political oriented these days because that's what's on so much of our minds. But I'm on there. And then I have an Instagram page that I actually just recently took completely off my phone because I realized Instagram as a whole was not serving me very well anymore. And making me a more angry person. So I'll probably come back to that here and there, but I am on Instagram at S Hayward Writes.
I love it. I love it. I agree with you. Instagram is like, it's hard when you're in different spaces, and it's like, okay, it's a necessary evil, but it really can be shifting your emotions, time suck, all that stuff. So admire that you took it off your phone. Maybe that's a good challenge for me. We'll see.
It's been easier than I thought. I thought I would be, you know, itching and scratching to get back to it. It hasn't been that bad. So
nice. I was just looking this morning. I cannot remember where it was. It was in some news outlet. And there was a study just done with people that spent 2 weeks off of the internet entirely, and it reversed like 10 years of cognitive issues that were happening, which I'm just like, oh my gosh, like there's a challenge then. Okay, let's see.
Yes.
So, Instagram might be the first step.
Yes. Yeah. Baby steps.
Exactly. Well, Sarah, it was so wonderful to have you here today. Thank you for sharing more about your story. And I hope everybody goes and buys your book. And I listened to it on Audible. So it was great to be able to like hear those words as well. So thank you for being here.
Thanks, Laura. This was great.
Thank you again to Sarah Henn Hayward for joining us for another amazing discussion on the Sunday School Dropouts. It was so wonderful to hear another person's story. And I know sometimes we don't get to hear those stories that have a little bit more lightness in them, where somebody was able to be a part of a high control religion and walk away relatively unscathed. And that happened, which is, I love the subjectivity of healing. Because all of us have different journeys and different stories. And there are many people who can work through things in a very cognitive way and still be able to have an appreciation for what it was that they experienced and really take that into their life and become a really incredible person. So I really loved Sarah's story, and I would encourage you to go ahead wherever you buy your books, whether it's, Amazon or Target or Audible, or go ahead and request it at your local library or local bookstore. It's anywhere where books are sold. It is called Giving Up God, and we will have all of that information in the show notes. And with that, that's another episode of Sunday School Dropouts, and all God's people said, Amen.